We were there in Singapore for the first Kim-Trump summit. And now we are here in Hanoi for the second. But the question we asked then is still relevant today. Will peace have a chance? Tune in to World Insight with me, Tian Wei, from the city of Hanoi, our special coverage of the second Kim-Trump summit. Hello and welcome to World Insight special program on the second DPRK U.S. summit. Coming to you live from Hanoi, I'm Tian Wei. The second Kim-Trump summit was cut short on Thursday with no agreement reached between the two sides. According to President Donald Trump from the United States, Kim Jong-un from the DPRK demanded that the U.S. lift all sanctions. In exchange, the DPRK would dismantle some of its nuclear facilities. Trump said it was a deal that he had to walk away from. So far, the DPRK side has not commented yet about the outcome of the summit. So where does this leave diplomatic efforts to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula? What can we expect for the near future? Take a look.
No deal for the second DPRK U.S. summit.
Basically, they wanted the sanctions lifted in their entirety, and we couldn't do that. They were willing to denuke a large portion of the areas that we wanted, but we couldn't give up all of the sanctions for that. So we continue to work, and we'll see, but we had to walk away from that particular suggestion.
He said he could have signed a deal, but without some key give-ins from Kim, he couldn't do it. In the original program, a joint agreement signing ceremony was scheduled as well as a working lunch. Both men left the summit venue without the ceremony, and Trump moved up his news conference by 2 hours. The Hanoi summit was supposed to build on their initial historic meeting at Singapore, but Trump still spins it in a positive way.
You know, I was watching, as a lot of you folks over the weeks have said, we've given up. We haven't given up anything, and frankly, I think we'll end up being very good friends with Chairman Kim and with North Korea, and I think they have tremendous potential. I've been telling everybody they have tremendous potential.
The smiles and lightheartedness in Hanoi are reminiscent of their meeting in Singapore. Both Trump and Kim had expressed hope for progress on improving relations and on the key issues of denuclearization.
Chairman Kim, are you ready to denuclearize?
That's a good answer. Wow, that might be the best answer you've ever heard.
Failure to reach an agreement makes a setback for Trump, who branded himself as a deal maker. He is also under pressure at home over his ties to Russia and testimony from his personal lawyer, accusing him of breaking the law while in office. Is there anything solid coming out of the summit? One thing seems certain. Trump said that Kim had promised him that there would be no more nuclear tests.
For more on the Kim-Trump summit, with us in Los Angeles, Jonathan Pollock, a non-resident senior fellow in the Center for East Asia Policy Studies and the John Thornton China Center at the Brookings Institute. In Washington, D.C., we have David Kim, a former U.S. State Department East Asia and Non-Proliferation official who's a research analyst at the Stimson Center. Last but not least, in our Beijing studio, Gowdy, Vice President of the Center for China and Globalization. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. This is an important day, even though an agreement was not reached between the DPRK and the United States. So let me go to you, Mr. Pollock, very briefly. To begin with, were the two sides, in fact, very far away from one another? Briefly.
They are far away from one another. I think expectations here, journalistically and otherwise, all outpaced the possibilities, and when it came down to what we could call crunch time, there was no basis on which to proceed with any kind of a formal agreement.
And what about for you, Mr. Kim? Certainly from the time of analyzing the DPRK for decades, looking at the results so far, are you surprised?
I am surprised a bit, but I would say that I think there was a package deal going forward into the summit. I think there was some scuffling of demands either from the U.S. side or the North Korea side that could have turned this agreement around and scuttled it at the last minute.
Interesting. Mr. Gao from Beijing. Now, the Chinese Foreign Minister, Mr. Wang Yi, already talked about this is the deep water zone, in his words, when it comes to the denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula. It seems a long way to go. Mr. Gao, briefly.
I think the result in Hanoi is surprising as well as not surprising as far as I'm concerned. Surprising in the sense that the two sides got so close to each other and the expectation raised just before the final outcome came was so high, and the world was led to believe that there must be something coming out of it in a positive way, but eventually nothing positively coming out. Now, not surprising in the sense, I think in substance, the two sides are as far as you can get as to how to define denuclearization and how to achieve denuclearization. And I think the United States probably was misled to believe that DPRK would achieve denuclearization, whereas North Korea most likely doesn't want to do denuclearization unless they are 100% assured that their survivability and security will be absolutely guaranteed.
Okay.
The two sides are very far from each other.
It is being reported right now that the DPRK, according to the U.S. side, are demanding for the total relief of sanctions against the DPRK. Of course, according to President Trump, though, that he walked away from that. However, Mr. Pollock, the U.S. seems to also ask DPRK at this moment more than Pyongyang could accept. Mainly, it's not just about Yongbian, and actually much beyond.
It does, and the intimations from the press conference by President Trump is that the U.S. expectations were higher, they were tabled, and North Korea, on the other hand, Kim Jong-un, simply wanted the sanctions relief he was unprepared to give on other fronts. So in this sense, I really don't think we should be surprised at all by this ultimate lack of closure that was here. I would, however, emphasize we have only heard from President Trump and Secretary of State Pompeo about this. We've heard nothing from the North Koreans. We may not hear anything for some days since Kim Jong-un remains in Vietnam for the next several days. You know, I think it's very important to keep in mind that we only have one account right now of why ultimately there was no joint statement. But let's be frank, this is a big loss for President Trump. It is an even bigger loss for President Moon Jae-in in South Korea, who was really banking on a big breakthrough here, and now his hands are tied, and he knows it.
You are bringing in a lot of different factors, in fact, in this very important discussion. We're going to go to different parties, their interests and their involvement a bit later in our discussion. For now, Mr. Kim, to you. Now, President Trump of the United States walked into the discussion morning in the room, in fact, with a lot on his shoulder. He had to perform, and yet this time failed because of the issues back at home. Also need some uplifting here. So, Mr. Kim, in fact, how well do you think the party on the other side of the negotiating table also know this and would ask, as a result of that, a price that the other side thought would be appropriate?
Say that one more time, Tian, just the last part.
Yes, I'm saying that the DPRK side, how well do you think and sophisticated understand the U.S. side for President Trump particularly to have this victory?
I think the North Koreans absolutely understand the United States well. The negotiating team that was at the table have done this, some of them for decades, since the beginning. Our U.S. team have had many turnovers in the last, especially several years since President Trump has come in. So Kim Jong-un and his team have come prepared. They have done their homework. I think the U.S. side, Special Envoy Began and his team, they were prepared, but they could have been more prepared. And I think that, you know, we don't know the details yet, so it's too early in the game to get into speculation about what happened. But what is important is that both leaders came out claiming that they wanted to continue this relationship. And again, I'm going to emphasize point 1 of the Singapore statement, establishing new relations between the United States and DPRK is the fundamental core of this game, and it's a long-term game. It's going to live past Trump's presidency, and Trump wants to put in the mechanism towards continuing dialogue with Kim Jong-un through his love for him or through his camaraderie with him.
Right. Mr. Pollock, your experience in, let's just say, the ups and downs of the Korean Peninsula nuclear crisis, six-party talks, years of it, did not necessarily manage to reach an ultimate solution, though laying a good foundation. And the big summit earlier in Singapore did not follow up with all satisfying steps by both sides, at least into each other's eyes. So, what can we expect? Will something on the ground really begin to build up, since today the so-called celebrity diplomacy failed?
Well, that's precisely the point, Tianwei. President Trump seems to believe he can pull rabbits out of a hat, that on a very hurried up basis you can send teams off to negotiate things. This is not a way to conduct diplomacy on an issue like this, if you were really seriously intent on that diplomacy. President Trump believes because of his personal role, he can somehow finesse things. He thinks he can do the same thing with Xi Jinping on U.S.-China trade. It's just not at all an effective way. And frankly, I think the president, if anything, has been a bit sobered, and for Trump, even a little humbled by the outcome here. I also want to emphasize, he is very distracted. You could see that in the press conference. He even acknowledged that he was spending a lot of his time in Hanoi watching the TV coverage of Michael Cohen's testimony. This is not a formula for success, to put it mildly.
Yes, not at all. But if you look at from now until a few days or weeks, which was the timeline that the U.S. side is specifically laying out during the press conference, Mr. Kim, can we expect any specific steps from the U.S. side, at least, to build up some kind of confidence and even some concrete steps, even though small? Mr. Kim.
Yeah, I think we definitely can. I think President Trump has probably indicated, or has indicated to President Moon that he wants him to continue diplomacy from his side and continued dialogue with North Korea. I think President Moon will play a critical role in continuing to maintain relationships with North Korea, just as he did when the first Kim-Trump summit was canceled back in May. And so I think we have to look at how President Trump will allow his negotiators to move forward and empower the negotiating team, allow them flexibility to really get through to a technical deliberation with North Korea that has really the devil is in the details, and you have to get into the minutia. But
yeah,
I think as long as the leaders are committed,
technical determination and technical details. Exactly what do you mean? Technical details. Give us some examples.
I think that possibly Yongbyon facility, the capping of uranium and plutonium may or may not have been on the table. Trump, if you remember the press briefing, mentioned specifically covert uranium sites, Kangsan, or possibly another covert site that is well known in the intelligence community. And when asked by press whether that was part of the discussion, President Trump said yes. And so I think whether it was a full declaration that Bolton was asking for, whether it was additional inspections into the covert sites that I mentioned, or if it wasn't enough at the Yongbyon facility, it's a facility of 390 buildings that is vast, and it would be meaningful to get to some concrete steps on Yongbyon to dismantle and cap some of their fissile material. But we have to understand that this is going to take a long time because the technical details, their arsenal has grown so much since the last negotiations back in 2007. when we had the joint statement, implementing statement. So again, we're at a place where Kim Jong-un could have, up to 36, maybe even 60 nuclear weapons. We don't know the scope yet, and we don't have the trust built to even get to that kind of conversation.
Well, Mr. Kim, I have to remind you, though, during the press conference, the president said the other way. He was suggesting that U.S. know every inch of DPRK very well, and therefore asked what he asked during the discussion. Anyway, let me go to you, Mr. Gao. There are different sides already expressed their views about what's the future of the DPRK nuclear issue, also coming from the Chinese side. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi meeting on the same day when the second summit took place in Hanoi with the Deputy Foreign Minister of DPRK, and he talked about the so-called deep water zone. He talked about several things: determination, patience, dialogue, work toward each other, and eventually have the continuity of the discussion. Now, Mr. Gao, what can we really expect now? Already a failure of reaching any agreement so far. Mr. Gao, very briefly.
I think fundamentally the current approach may be the wrong approach. President Donald Trump wants to claim and monopolize all the credit to himself as if he is a solo hero and he could change everything and he could achieve denuclearization of DPRK, whereas all the other people or in other countries, for example, have failed so far. This is not going to work. His art of negotiations will not be applicable here and deliver the real result. As far as China is concerned, China has all the good intention, and China has done its part throughout the years, as well as for this summit in Hanoi. And I think the new approach would definitely need to involve more parties involved directly. China, for example, Russia, for another example. You cannot really believe that between the United States and DPRK, they can achieve denuclearization.
Right.
Because DPRK is fundamentally concerned about the safety of their state and the survivability of the regime. And if they really give up the nuclear weapon, what else can they count upon? So I think President Donald Trump is humbled and sobered, and hopefully he and his government will really come down to realities and come up with a better approach.
Really?
I think so.
Well, Mr. Pollock, really, is that going to happen? I mean, if you think about it, President Trump's international diplomacy all based on bilateral, and what he's Mr. Gao, for example, was suggesting it's about multilateral platform. Even though we want to accept, during the press conference, President Trump mentioned everybody: South Korea, Russia, China, Japan, everybody. So what is likely to be the approach? That, isn't it, going to be the ultimate question, Mr. Pollock?
Well, Mr. Gao makes a very relevant point. What Mr. Gao was describing was something much closer to the six-party process. But Trump can't do that. Trump has to say, I'm going to do it my way. No one has done this before. I know how to handle this. It would be in a stunning admission on his part if he went back to something that was recognizable from the past, even though logic and interest would dictate that kind of an approach. But here again, I have to emphasize, President Trump is under pressure on multiple fronts right now. He is personally very identified with this relationship with Kim Jong-un, but the problem with that is it's all independent of the true realities, the true need, if you can, to come to some kind of definitive understanding. The very fact that here we are almost 9 months after Singapore, that by the acknowledgement of the U.S. team, there is no agreement on what denuclearization is, or, as Mr. Gao noted, how to get there. That should be job one, not job 27. And until you get to it, you're going to see more frustration, more stymieing, more stalemate that would inhibit any kind of discernible, effective, lasting movement on this very fundamental issue.
Now, President Donald Trump is what he is. He is with that kind of personality. He has that kind of approach. But, Mr. Kim, for all the other parties in the region, China, North Korea, South Korea, Japan, and certainly Russia as well, it is something at the front door, right? It's a crisis that all have to face up to. So how will the other 5 parties, particularly China and South Korea in this regard, be able to walk or help Washington to walk with them toward the next step to build up once again something has already dissembled today as a result of the failure of the second talk? Mr. Kim.
Well, thank you, Tian. I think that China is going to play a critical role to provide security guarantees for North Korea. South Korea is going to provide economic incentives, Kumgang tourism, Kaesong industrial complex, railroad infrastructure. Russia is going to play the same role. And we have to understand President Trump is wary of the alliance that we have with South Korea. He had mentioned, if you include yesterday, it's 109 times during his presidency he has questioned troops on the South Korean peninsula. Now, given that fact, South Korea has to maneuver in a way that will allow other parties to be involved in this process. China's role is going to be critical in signing a formal peace treaty. Russia is going to be hopefully critical in providing energy assistance, oil pipeline through to Europe, additional guarantees, and so is Japan. Japan is going to play a big role in providing some kind of economic incentives for North Korea. So each party has stakes in this, but I think right now South Korea really has the hot seat in continuing the diplomatic masterstroke that President Moon brought before both leaders got together, and he will have to carry the water.
Right. President Moon's constructive role has been widely recognized for pushing forward the summits, both the first time and the second time. However, having said that, though, he was also telling the outside world that President Trump, in the telephone call to him, was regretting about the regrets, in a way, about the failure of the second round. So who is likely to be the central piece now, pushing everybody toward one step closer to a real discussion? That's going to be a big question mark. Mr. Pollock, to you, what's likely to be the answer to it?
I think right now I would advocate a pause in any kind of an expectation of a near-term negotiating breakthrough. If President Trump were to be realistic about this, he would sit down with his advisors and ask themselves seriously, what didn't happen here? And is there some alternative way? I continue to be enormously skeptical of any kind of a definitive outcome here. It's just not in the cards. But Trump is personally invested in this. He ought to be listening to others, but he's not much of a listener, frankly. And that, by others, I mean other actors in this process. So I'm very, very skeptical and wary of some kind of comprehensive, multinational, multilateral, comprehensive approach for North Korea. This presumes that North Korea and Kim Jong-un is ready to let the outside world in, and I just don't see it.
Mr. Gao, it's no secret that President Trump wants to seek support from the Chinese side on the Korean Peninsula nuclear issue, which is also an issue that China feels dear to its security and its heart. But by mentioning China many times at the press conference and calling on 5 Chinese reporters, would that really solve the problem, Mr. Gao? To what extent, on what issue do you think China and the U.S. can now get more closer consultation regarding denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula, given what we had with the 6-party talks, years of experience for all sides, including China and the U.S.?
Thank you very much. I think either for the denuclearization to be achieved on the Korean Peninsula or for the peace treaty to be concluded, China was there, China is here, and China will always be here. China has no desire at all to seek any credit, for example, for itself, but China has done a lot of heavy lifting in the front or behind the scene, and China will continue to play a very constructive role. Now, I personally truly believe the current approach is a wrong approach, and it will not deliver the final denuclearization, and the United States and DPRK are locked head against each other, and both are cornering the other side into a dilemma. A new approach is necessary, and new creativity is necessary, and I hope both DPRK and the United States, together with other relevant parties, will need to think through this and come up with a new approach. The final goal will always be denuclearization. Without achieving denuclearization, there will always be this crisis on the Korean Peninsula, and none of us will live in peace and tranquility.
But as you may know, Mr. Pollock, for example, there are a lot of issues on hand between China and the United States. That is also true between the United States and Russia, between the United States and South Korea, for example. So how can we expect that real cooperation to happen despite of the desire from all sides to really work together? Mr. Pollock, before you answer that question, I want to really put a footnote here. I talked to earlier Ambassador Christopher Hill, you know, the U.S. ambassador that were participating as a representative for the six-party talks. He was regretting the fact that U.S. and China not working together on some of the most important issues of the world, which is, for example, denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, but rather having an apparent trade war with one another. Mr. Pollock.
I would agree very much with Ambassador Hill. You know, the problem here is Trump's, what I'll call his diplomatic style. He likes the one-on-ones. He likes that sense of sequential confrontation and conflict with different actors. He's not thinking in a comprehensive strategic basis. He's looking at more tactical maneuvering, case-by-case basis, than anything, frankly, more sustainable and more serious. That's who President Trump is. He thinks there's great advantage in this. He thinks that this keeps him central to the process, but none of this guarantees credible long-term outcomes. At the same time, he consistently undermines his negotiating teams. He's done that on trade. He's doing this here. Mr. Vegan, again, is not the high-level official, but you've got to give your negotiators room for maneuver. You can't expect to sort of pull rabbits out of a hat at the end of this process.
Well, we will see whether it's about only President Trump or it's about the current thinking process in Washington, D.C. toward China, for example, and the other countries. Before we go, very briefly, I know, gentlemen, you have a lot of thoughts to share with us, particularly today, but very briefly, every one of you, a sentence or two to see where we're going to go from here. Let's start with you, Mr. Kim. Briefly, please.
I really think it's too early to even talk about that because we don't know what transpired at the summit. I think what's important, again, to bring home is the fact that both leaders are committed to this relationship. And because both leaders are committed, we hope that they will empower their negotiators to move forward with an agreement. And when the next meeting happens, we should not bring this maximalist approach of wanting more. When we can only probably get piecemeal denuclearization.
All right, a cool mind that you are calling upon us right now. Do you see the hope at the end of the tunnel? What about for you, Mr. Pollock? Briefly, please.
I would advocate a much quieter process at this point, much less grabbing for big headlines, much less the drama of summits with Kim. We can see the results here in 2 summits have been both very disappointing. Let's let the process go at a quieter level. You'll see much more effective results at that level than by this way.
A quieter level to see more fruits at the end of the day. That's from Mr. Pollock. Last but certainly not least, Mr. Gao, briefly.
Well, don't give up and continue the good work, but use very, very different or substantially different approaches. And don't treat it as a TV show. Don't treat this as an art of negotiations, for example. This is real diplomacy and real geopolitics at the very core, and we need to deal with them as they are rather than as a show business.
Not a show, not a drama, real issues at stake. Thank you so much, gentlemen, the 3 of you, for joining us on this very important day. The second summit failed, and yet the hope is still there. Let's work hard toward that goal. Thank you, really appreciate it. Gowdy, Jonathan Pollock, David Kim, thank you. Stay with us here on World Insight, coming to you live from the city of Hanoi. I'm Tian Wei. Still to come on our program. How deep are the ties that bind Vietnam and the DPRK? An interview with 3 young ladies about their families from Vietnam and the DPRK in times of war and peace, right after this break. We were there in Singapore for the first Kim Trump summit. And now we are here in Hanoi for the second. But the question we asked then is still relevant today. Will peace have a chance? Tune in to World Insight with me, Tian Wei, from the city of Hanoi, our special coverage of the second Kim Trump summit. Welcome back. You're still watching a World Insight special program on the second DPRK U.S. Summit. I'm Tian Wei, coming to you live from Hanoi. In times of war, women and children are usually the most vulnerable and the first to feel the pain of a protracted conflict. When families get separated in the heat of conflict, the scars are slow to heal. In the morning coffee in the Vietnamese capital, I met through friends these 3 young ladies, a Vietnamese and 2 South Koreans. The pains of wars decades ago are still being with them and their families. They help me better understand the stakes for peace. Jackie, hello. Lucy, Jay, good to see you. Good to see you here in Hanoi. So these are the friends that I just got to know in the city of Hanoi. Thank you so much for taking your time talking to me. I know all of you have your personal stories in a way to link to what's going on right now. For example, you, Jackie, coming from South Korea.
Yeah, South Korea, home.
But having relatives in the north.
Yes, my grandfather from North Korea.
When did you know that it's going to be in Hanoi, the summit?
10 days ago. My mom heard that from the news, Korean news, and then directly called to me. My Korean name is Junghyun. Junghyun, do you know that?
What did she say?
Oh, you know, actually my mom know the Hanoi hotel in Marriott Hotel,
Yeah.
but I know the hotel and then I know the Hanoi is very exciting. So that's why actually I heard from my mom. It's not the Hanoi news.
Very typical South Korean mom, right? So what about that? Why is she so excited about it? Because your family, some of them were still in the north, I heard?
Actually, yes, we have some family live in the north. My grandfather and grandmother tried to find their relatives several times. My father said some relatives live in North Korea now, but we don't know their name or the age.
So you lost them?
Yeah.
I hope this time could be the very start of your searching for your beloved ones who you didn't even get to know. How can I say? I know. And now let's meet Jay in the middle. So I'm sure you have your own story to tell.
All of my family come from South Korea, and one of my relatives, he's actually my grand auntie's husband. Yes, he came from North Korea, and during the Korean War, and he earned a lot of money, and he became a big rich in Korea. But my grand auntie didn't know that he had a family in North Korea. He had a wife and 2 sons in North Korea, and it was his dream to meet them someday. But when it was the time of Kim Jong-il, not Kim Jong-un. But I heard that he made it. He managed to meet his sons, but they were very old and sick. So I heard that he...
Old and sick.
Yeah, yeah, and he sent them some money, and they met each other several times. So he achieved his lifetime wish and died about 10 years ago.
But he did meet.
Yes, yes, he made it.
Yeah. So how does your great aunt feel about this?
Oh, he cried. He cried for several days. I think she still feels pain about it. Anyway, he deceived his wife. So, yeah.
It's a very complex feeling, I would assume.
Yes.
Right? On the one hand, she was not informed when she
yes,
got
for a
married
long
to
time,
him.
yes.
But on the other hand, she felt also warm and nice in a way, because eventually the one that he loved,
yes,
the husband, met the one that he loved.
Yes, right.
So it's a very complex feeling.
Yes, right.
What was it like for the family to talk about that?
We don't talk about it because, you know, about our condition of Korean Peninsula, it always reminds us about our constant threat posed by North Korea, but so it's not familiar or kind or happy topics about family talking or friends talking, so we don't.
One thing is common, that for our countries, wars were a frequent thing decades ago. I don't know how we survived, but we did, right? No matter what war against whom, those are wars, and we did not have a choice, I guess, all of us as one individual. So tell me, Lucy, how is it like for you? You know, obviously you're of the younger generation. See, you know, things related to war, a talk about the Korean Peninsula happening in your city, in a city longing for peace, but certainly a city that experienced so much wars before.
So I just thought that, like a woman, we don't like a war. A lot of pain, divides, unpeace, and hard life, and difficult for many people. Actually, we don't want to hear much more about the war in the world. So, like a country also, there's almost the same with the South Korea and North Korea. But luckily now, we are the peace. We got the peace, and we're trying to open it for everyone to come in. And also in the near future, the country, also the same country, can become one, and with a good, bright future for both of us.
Yeah. Well, that sounds like a political statement you just made. That's such a big statement.
Peace, that's it.
Yeah, because you know, I guess in a way, what is it like to live in peace? Of course, we now in South Korea also live in peace. If you look at the talks, but you know, I mean, your grandparents' generation, your parents' generation, your generation, your kids' generation, all have very different
thinking.
Very different lives, right?
Yeah, right.
Your grandparents' generation must be those that experienced wars.
Yeah, my grandparents was around from 1915. Yeah, almost the same time they have tried two war in the Vietnam. And I just heard about the history about the house from the story of my grandfather, grandmother. They say that about the bombing, the dead, how
during
they
the Vietnam War.
In the Vietnam War, how they had to run, live in the cave, in the forest, like before time. The life is very hard, not easy to go in. They are nervous every day. They don't know until tomorrow they still live or not. They're not sure about it.
How did they survive?
They have, after bombing, they have the gun running in the forest, in the cave to live. Nothing to eat. They have to eat some vegetable on the forest. Go to the spawn, take out the fish or something like that. Maybe they have to live about 1 or 2 months. After bombing, they come back to the last and the normal life. Yeah, and also the lack of the food, lack of the drink, lack of the medicine, like everything's lack of in the war. My grandfather and my grandmother said very hard life. Thank God they survived. Yeah.
It's so different, their lives and ours,
yeah,
right?
Yeah, so different. Yeah, very hard life.
You are here as an entrepreneur. opening up your own coffee shop.
Yeah, right.
Are you feeling proud of it?
I call it a bit to be the more confident, to be the freezy every day. Yeah, I do what I want.
So think about yourself, you know, doing your work proudly, running your own shop every day, and smiling to your customers compared to your grandma hiding in the caves.
Life is so different.
It's just so different, right?
Yeah, right. And I think that our life, our young generation got a better life, more bright in future.
Yeah. And what does that mean for your kids?
I think I hope in the near future they can go them much more better than me, more open. They can go everywhere to say, okay, I'm proud, I'm Vietnamese, and can do what they want, can learn what they want to learn, and do what they want. That's it.
So thank you so much, Jackie, Jay, and Lucy. Thank you. All the best to you and your families. And that warm conversation helped us to wrap up the special coverage of the Kim Trump Summit here in Hanoi. Peace, that's the word in everyone's heart. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From Tianwei in the Vietnamese capital and everyone on the World Insight team, both in Beijing and Hanoi, thanks for watching and tune in again next time for more insights across China and around the world. Goodbye and good night from Hanoi.